But before we accompany her there, let us see what Kay is doing. He is certainly not thinking of Gerda. Least of all can he imagine that she is now standing at the palace gate. The walls of the palace were formed of the driven snow. Its doors and windows of the cutting winds. There were above 100 halls, the largest of them many miles in extent, all illuminated by the northern lights, all alike vast, empty, icily cold, and dazzlingly white. No sounds of mirth ever resounded through these dreary spaces. No cheerful scene refreshed the sight.
Little Kay was quite blue, nay, almost black with cold, but he did not observe it. For the Snow Queen had kissed away the shrinking feeling he used to experience, and his heart was like a lump of ice. He was busy with sharp, icy fragments, laying and joining them together in every possible way, just as people do with what are called Chinese puzzles. Kay could form the most curious and complete figures. This was the ice puzzle of reason. And in his eyes, these figures were of the utmost importance. He often formed whole words, but there was one word he could never succeed in forming. It was eternity. The Snow Queen had said to him,
"When thou canst put that figure together, thou shalt become thine own master, and I will give thee the whole world, and a new pair of skates besides."
But he could never do it, and the Snow Queen said,
"Now I am going to the warm countries. I shall flit through the air and look into the black cauldrons, the burning mountains, Etna and Vesuvius. I shall whiten them a little. That will be good for the citrons and vineyards."
So away flew the Snow Queen, leaving Kay sitting all alone in the large empty hall of ice. He looked at the fragments and thought till his head ached. He sat so still and so stiff that one might have fancied that he too was frozen. Cold and cutting blew the winds when little Gerda passed through the palace gates, but she repeated her evening prayer and then immediately sank to rest. She entered the large, cold, empty hall. She saw Kay. She recognized him. She flew upon his neck. She held him fast and cried,
"Kay, dear, dear Kay, I have found thee at last."
But he sat still as before, cold, silent, motionless. His unkindness wounded poor Gerda deeply. Hot and bitter were the tears she shed. They fell upon his breast. They reached his heart. They thawed the ice and dissolved the tiny splinter of glass within it. He looked at her whilst she sang her hymn. "Roses bloom and fade away. Our infant Lord abides away." Then Kay burst into tears. He wept till the glass splinter floated in his eye and fell with his tears. He knew his old companion immediately and exclaimed with joy, "Gerda, my dear little Gerda, where hast thou been all this time? And where have I been? Oh, how cold it is here, how wide and empty." And he embraced Gerda, whilst she laughed and wept by turns. Even the pieces of ice took part in their joy. They danced about merrily, and when they were wearied and lay down, they formed of their own accord the mystical letters of which the Snow Queen had said that when Kay could put them together, he should be his own master, and that she would give him the whole world with a new pair of skates besides. And Gerda kissed his cheeks, whereupon they became fresh and glowing as ever. She kissed his eyes, and they sparkled like her own. She kissed his hands and feet, and he was once more healthy and merry. The Snow Queen might now come home as soon as she liked. It mattered not. Kay's charter of freedom stood written on the mirror in bright, icy characters. They took each other by the hand and wandered forth out of the palace.
And as they walked on, the winds were hushed into a calm, and the sun burst forth in splendour from among the dark storm clouds. When they arrived at the bush with the red berries, they found the reindeer standing by awaiting their arrival. He had brought with him another and younger reindeer, whose udders were full, and who gladly gave her warm milk to refresh the young travellers. The old reindeer and the young hind now carried Kay and Gerda on their backs, first to the little hot room of the wise woman of Finnmark, where they warmed themselves and received advice how to proceed on their journey home, and afterwards to the abode of the Lapland woman, who made them some new clothes and provided them with a sledge.
The whole party now ran on together till they came to the boundary of the country. But just where the green leaves began to sprout, the Lapland woman and the two reindeers took their leave. And they all said,
"Farewell,
farewell,
farewell."
And the first little birds they had seen for many a long day began to chirp and warble their pretty songs, and the trees of the forest burst upon them full of rich and variously tinted foliage. Suddenly, the green boughs parted asunder, and a spirited horse galloped up. Gerda knew it well, for it was the one which had been harnessed to her gold coach, and on it sat a young girl wearing a bright scarlet cap and with pistols on the holster before her.
It was indeed no other than the robber maiden, who, weary of her home in the forest, was going on her travels, first to the north and afterwards to other parts of the world. She at once recognized Gerda, and Gerda had not forgotten her. Most joyful was their greeting, and she said to Kay,
"Ah, fine gentleman you are, to be sure, you gracious young truant. I should like to know if you deserve that anyone should be running to the end of the world on your account."
But Gerda stroked her cheeks and asked after the prince and princess.
"They are gone travelling into foreign countries."
Then Gerda asked after the raven.
"Ah, the raven is dead. The tame beloved has become a widow. So she hops about with a piece of black worsted wound round her leg. She moans most piteously and chatters more than ever. But tell me now all that has happened to you, and how you managed to pick up your old playfellow."
And Gerda and Kay told their story. The robber maiden sang gaily.
"Snip, snap, snurr, bacilla."
She pressed the hands of both, promised that if ever she passed through their town, she'd pay them a visit, and then bade them farewell and rode away out into the wide world. Kay and Gerda walked on hand in hand, and wherever they went it was spring, beautiful spring, with its bright flowers and green leaves.
They arrived at a large town. The church bells were ringing merrily, and they immediately recognized the high towers rising into the sky. It was the town wherein they had lived. Joyfully they passed through the streets. Joyfully they stopped at the door of Gerda's grandmother. They walked up the stairs and entered the well-known room. The clock said tick, tick, and the hands moved as before. Only one alteration could they find, and that was in themselves, for they saw that they were now full-grown persons.
The rose trees on the roof blossomed in front of the open window, and there beneath them stood the children's stools. Kay and Gerda went and sat down upon them, still holding each other by the hands. The cold, hollow splendor of the Snow Queen's palace they had forgotten. It seemed to them only an unpleasant dream. The grandmother, meanwhile, sat amid God's bright sunshine and read from the Bible these words.
"Unless ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven."
And Kay and Gerda gazed on each other. They now understood the words of their hymn. Roses bloom and fade away. The nymph of love is May we be blessed, His face to see, and ever later cheer on me.
There they sat, those two happy ones, grown up and yet children, children in heart, while all around them flowed bright summer, warm, glorious summer.